You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
You're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, a fun and informative show for riders, owners, trainers, grooms, and fans of all levels.
I'm Christy McCormick in Saratoga Springs, New York.
And I'm Ashley Winch in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And you're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, where we deliver at-home riding exercises to our listeners and chat with fellow horse enthusiasts about the world of show jumping. Before our guest today, a quick word from our title sponsor.
Relyne GI is a natural, long-term alternative that goes beyond masking symptoms. This unique blend of gut-friendly hyaluronan and wellness-boosting beta-glucan works with your horse's body to soothe and protect their digestive system. Unlike traditional therapies that can disrupt digestion and nutrient absorption, Relyne GI leaves your horse's natural balance intact. But don't take our word for it. Relyne GI is field tested by leading veterinarians and backed by peer-reviewed research, including a study by Dr. Nathan Slovis, showing it effectively reduces gastric ulcers in active horses. Plus, it's Clean Sport certified and safe for competition use. Head over to resolvet.com. That's RESOLVET.com and use code SJP at checkout for 10% off, linked in our show notes.
Today, we have a guest that I have just gotten to know over the last year. Her name is Christina Tremarchi. She is an amateur rider that lives close to me, and I've gotten the pleasure of helping her on her horse over a period of the winter time into some lessons, and we're just getting into our show season. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Christy. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So you are a working amateur, we're going to call that, right? Where you have what we'll say is a real job, not a horse job, because horse jobs aren't really real in my in my world, and have your own horse. So can you tell us a little bit about your background in riding and what your current riding status is?
Sure. So I started probably when I was 7 or 8. I had a cousin who her mom put her into all of the activities, and she always needed a friend, and insert friend of similar age. Mm-hmm. So she cried every week for 6 months when we started riding, and I stuck with it, almost 30 years later, here we are. So I grew up riding at a local barn, a lesson barn, and leased horses there probably through college, I would say. And then on and off for about 10 years as I kind of got into adulthood and jobs. And now, mid to late 30s, I have my own horse at a private facility, riding with you and trying to figure out how to navigate all of this.
And what is your real job?
So I work for the state government of New York. So that affords me a lot of flexibility and less flexibility than some in this post-COVID era. We've seen post-pandemic, a lot of jobs have moved fully remote, but I am in a job that I am allowed to be up to 50% remote. And so that's looked at on a biweekly period, so a pay period basis. So in a 10-day working period, I can be remote up to 5 days. So it allows some flexibility, but not as much as a full remote option.
Gotcha. So you do have you dictate your own schedule quite a bit. Is that right?
Yeah, to some extent. The nature of my work and my team's work is a little bit more on site. And so, in an effort to be a good manager, I try to, meet the expectations that I have for them. So it might look a little bit less remote than other folks in other positions. Mm-hmm. But I do have the ability, my current agency is very flexible in that it doesn't have to be 5 full days remote. So sometimes that looks like I work, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, maybe remote, and then the other 7 days I'm in the office. But other days it looks like I go to the office from 8 to maybe noon or 2, and then I work the rest of my day at home. And then I head to the barn after that. So I can do that, as long as it equates to less than 50% of my time.
Gotcha. So what's your typical riding schedule during the week?
Yeah, so it's hard. I'm generally after work. So I'm usually in the office by around 7:30 or 8 in the morning. And then I'm here till 4 to 5-ish, depending on the day and what's come up throughout the day. My office is like 45 minutes south of where my horse is boarded.
Mm-hmm.
So on a good day without traffic, I'm there 45 minutes. That assumes I don't have to make a pit stop at home to let the dog out or anything like that. But I've had times where, it's over an hour commute due to the traffic schedule. Again, because I'm hitting rush hour the same time everybody else is.
Sure.
So I'm usually to the barn around 5 or 5:30, and then I'm riding at that point. Obviously, with the summer, again, my job, I'm really lucky, is flexible. So on really hot days, it might look like me getting to the barn at 6 a.m. and maybe I'm working from home, so I can get down to my house by 9 to start my day, and then I work 9 to 5. So I'm usually there, I would say, to the barn anywhere between 5 and 7 days a week, trying to allow for life in there somewhere too.
Right. So you're really out of the house from maybe 7 to 7 every day with work.
Yeah,
and
easily.
then maybe you work at home a little bit, but you're working and then riding up until the evening hours. How challenging is that for your social life, or not even just social life, but the balance of the rest of your life? When do you fit in time for yourself?
It's hard, and it's hard as someone who always looked at the barn as my time for myself. That was always my thing. I always had that all the way growing up. It was my sanctity. It was my sanity to some extent. But now it does add a little bit more of a stressor some days, right? I have to look at my week, starting on Sunday and go all the way through. And thankfully, with you as a trainer, we have some flexibility. It's not like I'm set to a specific day. So if I look at my schedule and your schedule and aligns, I kind of say, okay, if we're going to lesson on Thursday, I need to make sure I have rides leading up to that so that I can have the most productive lesson.
Sure.
So each week I just start by, on a Sunday looking and trying to plan, okay, when can I work from home based on my meetings? When can I go directly to the barn? When do I need to do a morning? When can I take a day off? It's really difficult. And I rely a lot on my boyfriend at home, my partner. He thankfully has the ability to come home after work and often walk our dog at the 5 p.m. hour and start dinner before I get home. So, there's been plenty of times we're eating dinner at 8:30 at night, and then I'm up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So.
Yeah, I think anybody who has that kind of packed schedule needs a bit of a support system, right? And how does that work within your circle?
You've seen it. We have a huge support system. I have a couple friends. We call ourselves the Coop. It was a typo on co-op. And we have been riding together for many years at this point. We're all similar ages, so that helps in going through life things that are on the same time. So we've had horses at another facility together. That was a little bit more of a hands-on, we were doing more of the actual care, cleaning stalls, helping out feeding, stuff like that. So we really relied on each other during that time. It was like, oh, I'm stuck at work. Can anyone clean my stall or ride my horse today? And now he's at my horse is it's at a private facility, a full care facility. We're not doing that hands-on, but we still rely on each other all the time. It's often, hey, Lauren, I'm running late today, or I'm not going to make it. If you're there, can you brush my horse, or can you take a peek at him, or maybe hop on him?
Yeah.
When I go on vacation, they're willing to step in. So it's an absolute must as an adult to have some of that and to have the flexibility of your friends around.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for someone who has a full-time job and wants to keep riding, at a maybe not even, let's say, competitive level, but progressive level, where you're moving forward with your horse? And, I know the trajectory that you and I are trying to be on with your horse is such that, just improvement, right? Week to week, and maybe with the goal of getting to a horse show midsummer or later in the summer. What do you think are the biggest challenges for somebody in your position to handle?
It's one of those things that I've really had to come to terms with. I always had lofty goals of showing, more regularly and really campaigning and doing things. And even as a kid, but it just wasn't feasibly, one, financially as a kid. And then now as an adult, time-wise and financially, it's hard trying to balance all of that. And again, to your point earlier, having a life outside of work in the barn. But it's one thing one of the things I've really worked on is, accepting what we're going to be doing, what's realistic in my life, and riding the horse that I have each day. My horse is not always the easiest. And so maybe progress looks a little bit different day to day. It's not the big leaps and bounds I'd hope, week to week or month to month, but trying to find those pieces of good even through some of the struggles.
Yeah. I mean, coming from somebody who had a barn 24/7 and I'm, monitoring the horse's progress on a almost, definitely day by day basis. And we're all kind of on the fast track to working towards the horse show next week or the horse, going to Florida and kind of having a full-time circuit. And now being in a position where, I've stepped back a bit and have been able to help people like you who riding is their very, very, small percentage of their day. And it's interesting to see the differences in approach to how we train a horse and how we, you and I have been dealing with maybe a behavioral issue that if in a circuit barn where I could say, okay, Christina, I'll see you tomorrow, but I'm going to give him a lunge this afternoon and then I'm going to hop on him tomorrow morning and ride him and make sure that he's tuned up for you. It would be maybe a faster track, but also maybe a little more of a pressure track. I do love that because the expectations are a little bit relaxed due to circumstances, it almost allows for a little more freedom for where the horse is going. And at least that's my perspective as a trainer.
Yeah, 100%. I think, even though I've never really done the week in, week out horse shows, I've always put a little bit more pressure on myself. I think it's a personality flaw to some extent of being a perfectionist. But I always put that pressure on of needing to be able to horse show or needing it to go perfectly. I took last year off, I had moved my horse and I had started a new job, and it ended up being a summer of doing a lot of nothing. He was up and basically turned out in a field, and I would take him out in a cross country field and jump around or hack around. And taking that pressure off allowed me to come into working with you and this winter and this year with a completely different mindset. And I think I needed that. He needed that. And I think, just some of that is age and maturity, unfortunately, and just doing this a little bit more.
Yeah. And I guess, mindset is always the biggest thing, right? Mindset is what your expectations are and what your attitude is towards what you're getting out of this. And I would hope that, many of our listeners are amateurs who are trying to make a living and then also probably make a living to support their horse that is not cheap to support. You want to be able to enjoy it too and not just feel like you're checking a box just to go to the barn and get it done. How not to get into too much detail of what you're spending per barn. We all know what horses cost to keep alive and to keep going well.
Mm.
How big of a stress or how much of a factor are finances and your choices as an amateur, I guess, with, where you choose to spend money and where you choose that this might not be something that we can fit in this month?
Yeah, it definitely is, right? It's a factor for everyone. You're right. It's an expensive hobby, right? Like
expensive hobby. Yeah, exactly.
Hobby,
yeah.
And sometimes I joke he's an expensive dog, right? Like we're not showing, we're not campaigning. So
right.
What's the difference, really? And especially during those times of struggle, right? So, I did, like I mentioned before, the facility I had him at previously was somewhere I had been riding on and off for 10 years. And the trainer was great to me. I had, Nico's the first horse I've owned, but I had leased horses with her and ridden sale horses for her. Every time I took a break, I had a horse to ride when I came back. But I did, as a result, do more, manual labor around the barn to help out and to pitch in. Like I said, we were doing our own stalls to help out. And I liked caring for my horse. But as I kind of shifted last year into a new job and my commute was a little bit further, I knew it wasn't feasible for me to do that. To your point, it became, I have to go to the barn, and I would go and I would do a stall and I would get on him and I would leave the barn, and I just was going through the motions and I really was not enjoying it. And through nobody's fault, it's just a matter of circumstances, right? And so I had to look and say, what else is around here that I can make work? And again, finances were certainly a factor because I don't have unlimited finances. Unfortunately, I'm not independently wealthy. So I did have to look at that, but ultimately it became, for my own sanity and for what was best for me and my horse and our relationship and our progress. Like I needed to move to a place that was doing more full care, and I could maybe leave for 3 or 4 days and not just be, hey friend, I absolutely need you to do me this favor. Like I could just walk away and take that time. And so obviously that comes with an increased spend, but it's worth it for me at this point. And again, I was lucky. I was taking a new job that was a promotion, so I had a little bit more flexibility, but I just knew it wasn't going to be an option for me to continue down that path much longer. So
right.
Again, it all worked out for me, but it is hard. I do look at, I took him to Saratoga in May expecting to horse show or hoping to horse show.
Mm-hmm.
And he turns out was not really mentally ready for that. And I had to choke down the amount of money that I was spending to be there, but I had to do what was right for him and say, okay, I'm going to spend this, but we're not going to overface him right now. It's not worth it. He's not a horse I'm trying to sell and get on the market. And I don't need to rush this. He's my horse. He's my personal horse that I'm going to have for however long. There's no reason to rush this and ruin what could happen in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's the beauty of having the process of your trajectory is different than a full-time show horse. And like I just said, it takes the pressure off a little bit of the training and how quickly you need something done. So you can make those decisions. If that was a typical week of a horse in, like I said, my show barn, that maybe we were trying to qualify for something for year-end finals, we probably would have forced him into the ring, that week. We'd have said, okay, fine. He's a little out of sorts. Let's take 2 days, work him really hard, make him tired so that by the weekend you have a horse that you can compete on or some version of that, And so I really appreciated that you as an owner and, talking to me could make the decision to say, okay, he really isn't ready. He hasn't been showing all winter. This is the first time back. Let's ease off a little. And I'm sure that hurt financially for a quote, non-productive week, but really it was probably a very productive week, maybe more productive than actually forcing the show ring. And a lot of amateurs I teach now, like I said, that have jobs, and this is sort of an expensive hobby that they're doing, but they're trying to do it really well. The slow road is the fast road. So they are able to take that step back a little bit. What other, if you could change anything about your situation, let's put money aside from it, and maybe it's scheduling. I don't know. What would you, if you could change something about your current, working life horse balance, what would you change?
I think time, right? Time and scheduling, like I said, the commute is a little bit harder for me. So, it's also a factor of, what facilities are in your area and what are the trade-offs that you're taking to be at one facility versus another. You've seen, I've seen a lot in our local area. Those lesson and show barns are really dwindling, and you're starting to see more private facilities, and maybe it's my age, but private facilities with trainers coming in, which it's kind of nice for where I'm at right now in my life. But, the facilities, again, they're trade-offs. Some have better turnout. Some are farther away. Some, the care is not as good. So you have to find what that balance is for you. For me, again, it's a little bit hard just because of where I live compared to, the barn, and then where my job is even farther away. So yeah, I would love to be able to be a little bit closer. And, my old job, I could work 7 to 3. So I was getting out, and even if I was a little bit late, I was ahead of all the traffic. It wouldn't be as big of a deal. But I think that, getting that time, and, I spend the amount of miles I put on my car in a year is unheard of in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I do think that's one of the things, is just that constant go, go, go. I'd love, a little bit more time to breathe in between, the activities. Not
trying to feel like you're squeezing in your ride before, dusk and trying to have a little more enjoyment of your day, I suppose. Exactly. Ashley, do we have any, I know a lot of our listeners are amateurs. Do we have any listener questions that Christina could help us answer?
Absolutely. So one of the themes that we've seen a lot of recently is the overarching question is, how do I find my tribe? We have a lot of listeners who are out there looking to find a barn, a lesson program, a show program that is fun and that they can enjoy, because we're all supposed to be having fun while we do this at the end of the day. So what kind of advice would you guys have for our listeners looking to find their people?
Go ahead, Christina.
So it's a hard one, I think, because, mine was ingrained for the last probably, 5 to 10, more than that, probably 10 years at this point, from a previous barn that we had been friends and riding forever together. It's hard, I think, as an adult, and especially in these private facilities where it's not a lesson or show team. You don't get that camaraderie and that build necessarily, that tribe feeling. But man, if you can find them, it's so important. Just the other day I was riding with a friend of mine, and we were, she was not having a really fun time. She was in that downturn of the roller coaster, like horses are a roller coaster. We say it all the time. And we were able to kind of talk it through and figure out a plan. And the next day she came out and she had a great ride, so that's just how horses are. I think if you can find people that are like-minded, and maybe it doesn't have to even be the same riding goals or even the same riding discipline, but if you can find similar-minded people or similar age where you can connect outside of the horses too, that is huge for me, because then it's not completely focused on that, but we have that central place to hang out and communicate around, if nothing else.
Yeah. And I think that, hopefully if you're looking for the right thing for your horse first, you find like-minded people at the barn you're choosing. I think finding the right barn first has to come from finding the right place for your horse. Like you said, you had all those elements to consider. What place offers the right kind of turnout? What place offers, do outside trainers come in and out if you're not, riding with a main barn trainer? And if you're making that choice, then everybody else who's there has already made that same choice. So hopefully you have the same, values as far as your horsemanship. And I think too, what you just said, like you were, there was someone there not having a great ride, and you were able to talk it through with her. And whether that's someone that you just met at the barn or someone you've known for a long time, I think we all want to do this and be able to communicate about things that are tough while we're communicating with horses. No matter what level we're doing, it's a hard sport. We're dealing with animals that they sometimes want to do their job. They sometimes don't. They can make our lives wonderful. They can make our lives tough. And if you can have a place where you can even share that with one person, maybe that's your tribe there, and that will grow. And I don't think you necessarily need a big barn with a lot of people. I think that you'll find places that are smaller that, if you're the kind of person who cares about your horse, you're already my friend, right? So kind of just connecting through the horses is a big deal. I think it's harder for people who maybe have horses. If you're lucky enough to have them in their backyard, you get to then ride at whatever time you want, but you don't have that other camaraderie. So Ashley, great question. I think that's something that a lot of people strive to find.
And our next question really continues on the roller coaster that Christina had mentioned earlier. We have a listener who their horse has been lame in all kinds of different ways, alternating feet, alternating health issues. What would you guys recommend to someone who is facing burnout due to their horse's health issues? Would you recommend them taking a break, quitting? She's just not having fun anymore. What would you guys recommend?
What would you say, Christina?
I would hate to see someone give up horses for something like that. And I can fathom and think I'm knocking on all the wood right now. Thankfully, that hasn't been an issue for me, but I've seen it with other friends, and you go through it. And of course, having a horse that's going through health issues is adding again to that financial stress and drain as well. My thing is always, what can we do to limit the cost or the time, but how can we find other areas that we can keep you involved, right? So, maybe your horse is lame. Maybe there's another horse at the barn or the property that can be ridden once a week or something just to keep you engaged. It's hard. I just, a couple weeks ago was kind of going through this with my horse, but from a behavioral issue side, not so much a physical, health issue side. I was really struggling. Again, I started to get to that. I'm going through the motions. I'm riding him. It's not fun for me. And I didn't love that feeling. So one, having our tribe, like we talked about. Two, finding something outside the barn or finding time outside the barn that's solely for you as a person. So I started taking long walks, listening to podcasts, or making an effort to read every day a little bit more, and taking that 30 minutes aside even if it was at 9 o'clock at night, to focus on me. And thankfully I have some friends who are willing to step in and, hop on my horse once a week so I could get that reprieve and do some stuff outside the barn. I spent a lot of time in therapy for stuff like this, candidly. So yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing. I don't have the answers, but where you can maybe give a little space and a little grace to yourself as you're struggling through it. And maybe it's changing the location of your horse for a little while, taking some of that pressure off. And whether maybe it's turning your horse out for 6 months and finding another horse to ride in the interim once a week or something. There's options that are out there.
And I think it's important to continue asking yourself why. It can be easy when your horse is continuously out of work because of a lameness problem or even an illness problem. And you're sort of then turning into a horse nurse that you're the parent of, but you don't get any riding out of, or you don't get any satisfaction out of. And you sort of have to go back to, why am I doing this? And that question can be, why am I doing this at all? I'm just spending money on this expensive animal that keeps, looking like they're getting better and then they're not. And that can for sure lead to feelings of burnout. I think I love Christina's answer of trying to, see how to keep riding in your life, but also take the perspective of, okay, this horse isn't doing what I thought they're doing now. We're hoping to get to the other side of this. And how can I adjust my expectations for this moment and maybe get to know my horse in a more intimate way, maybe get to know my horse in a more caring way as far as the physical side of it, and have the vet really explain, how this, educate yourself on how this tendon works with this joint, works with this foot, and why pain is an issue. Pain in horses is a big thing, and we all have to strive to keep them comfortable. And that can wear down financially after a while, because those vet visits are expensive. So my advice would be, step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Is this a horse that you're planning on keeping for its lifetime, or at least the next 5-ish years, and you have a long-term plan? Great. Then just think of it as an injury you have for yourself, and how can you help, nurse it through it and still keep your own interest in going to the barn and having that relationship with the horse. If that's just completely wearing you out and you're not getting any satisfaction out of any of that on a bigger scale, then maybe it is time to question if horses are part of your life and should be such in a more casual way, where you're not a horse owner and maybe you lease something or half lease something or just take lessons on something else once you get this horse, onto the next stage. Or maybe it's, just sort of questioning what your commitment is to the sport, because unfortunately, like you said, they're expensive dogs, but dogs you can nurse through and let them sit on the floor or in the kitchen or in the living room all day. The horses, need to have a lot more attendance than that. So that's a tough question. And it's something that people as horse owners need to think about as these challenges come up, and just sort of look at the bigger picture.
Very well said. And now finally, to lighten the mood a bit, is a question that's a tale as old as time. I've seen it asked, almost weekly across the different groups that I'm a moderator in. What underwear are we wearing at competitions? After having children, my underwear of the past is just not cutting it. So you guys don't have to tell me, your personal go-tos. We're not that kind of show, but what underwear are you guys recommending, or would you recommend to a fellow amateur rider or a girlfriend who is uncomfortable?
Wow, I didn't see that question coming.
Getting really
Christina,
here, Christy.
Go right ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, I don't have kids, so I might be living a different world than this person, than this question. Whatever you're comfortable in is what I'm going to say. And, I think it's fine. Everyone's living their best life. We're all just trying to make it through, especially in this heat. That's my take. I'm going to keep it like that.
I actually am a big proponent of boxer briefs because, things move places. The heat gets things, going, chafing in the wrong places, not to get too specific, but boxer briefs that are a little sporty that can fit nicely under a pair of breeches work just fine sometimes. And they can cover up a lot of spots, a little more than our, Victoria's Secret little undies. So Ashley, thanks for that out of the blue question. I love it. Christina, I do have one last question for you that's hopefully in a lighter mood as well. Not even a lighter. This has been a great conversation. I think amateurs really struggle with, the day-to-day challenges of owning a horse, whether it's financially, whether it's keeping that horse healthy, whether that's getting the most out of your trainer. So actually, let's go with two questions. And one is a little bit, I know the answer to, because you and I have a great working relationship. How do you work with a trainer? I'm kind of in a unique position where I'm freelancing. I have my own, a million other things going on. I know I text you several times and say, hey, that lesson that I thought I could do Thursday, I can't do it. Can we do Friday? How in the past maybe have you worked with people or gotten through some challenges with, if you're riding at a barn and they don't want to stay until 6:00 to give you a lesson, or, how do you work through those challenges with someone you're riding with?
Yeah, it's hard, especially at more of like I said, you're much more flexible with me and my schedule. It's hard. I kind of just had to make it work. I am lucky that previously I was at more of a lesson show barn. So, lessons often extended until 6:00, and often I would be a later one. And he also would meet me sometimes at 6:00 in the morning to do a lesson if it was hot in the summer. It's not ideal for anyone, but it's doable. I think it's just about finding that time. And if maybe it's not, maybe it's a lunchtime lesson. If your work is more flexible and you can take a 2-hour break in the middle of the day and you work a little earlier and a little later to make up for that, you find that way to balance however that works for you. And Christy, you and I have talked about, what works for us. And maybe, I'm lucky again where I am in my riding career and where my horse is, that maybe a lesson doesn't work out on a weekly basis for you and I, but I can still do a couple of jumps here and there to keep him tuned up in the interim. That's not where everybody's at, but it's certainly where we can do a couple of small things to keep going in the interim.
Yeah, you're very self-sufficient. And I think maybe that as an amateur, if you're in a barn that allows for that, is pretty key to say, not that you need to be jumping around a course on your own if you're not comfortable doing that, but kind of keeping yourself motivated and keeping, I think that is communicating with your trainer, right? As far as what can I do in between lessons and what can I do on my own that will help, get the most out of a lesson. I think you've thought this out so well to say, okay, I have a lesson on Thursday if it's, if I don't cancel, and you back up the previous few days of how your horse can get prepared. So it's, and I deal with that too. I just right this minute got a text from another student that I teach, thinking ahead to the weekend for if I have time for a lesson. So she's trying to plan out her week. And I think planning ahead has to be a big priority, and everybody wants a plan, right? Everybody wants to know what's going on in their lives. If you're in a show barn, you tend to follow the barn's plan, right? So I think a lot of working amateurs have to create their own plan and, figure out what is best for the balance for their horse and for them and for their trainer. Last question is, do you have any funny anecdotal stories about maybe making things, you thought you had things that were all set to work, or, were in a plan and then just that didn't work out?
Oh, I can probably name, 10 times since I've started riding with you, Christy, that, I've said, yep, Christy and I have a lesson at 4:30 on Thursday, and Thursday rolls around and it is 4:10 and I am still in my office in Del Mar, 45 minutes from the barn.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my crew, my tribe is going to be there, and they usually come to watch my lessons, and we kind of all do that for each other. And there have been several occasions where, one or both of them are setting jumps and tacking my horse, and I am getting in, throwing on my boots and helmet and getting on the horse seconds before you've walked in the barn.
Hopefully, and I'm usually the one saying, I'm going to be 4 minutes late today. So, and you're like, oh, thank God.
I'm like, great, I just gained an extra minute to put on my hairnet.
Yeah, perfect. Right. sometimes it's about a lot about, kind of just connecting the moving parts as we're moving along. And that's life, right? That can be a metaphor for how we have to get through life sometimes, not just getting to our riding lesson, but how to really kind of fit our pieces together, whether it's exploding in your face or whether you think you're smooth sailing for the day. So
Exactly.
well, thank you so much for being on. You are not only a wonderful student, but you're an example of somebody who I admire as you're living both lives. You're making it work on your working day, and you're figuring out how to be a rider. So kudos to you.
Thanks so much, Christy.
All right. I'll see you at your next lesson, Christina.
And now a word from Equine Network. You've heard us talking about Spalding fly predators all spring, and now it's summer. Well, the flies are out in force, and Spalding is offering its best sale yet, 15% off the entire order. Be sure to use coupon code BYFLIES15. That's BYEFLIES 15. Time to get those flies under control.
Well, that was a great chat with Christina. And speaking with amateurs, I just got back from doing a 4-day clinic tour with both amateurs and juniors. I was over in Buffalo, New York, and Rochester. I went to 3 different barns in 4 days, and I had a similar setup for each day for these clinics. And they were luckily at wonderful barns that really did such a great, welcome, gave me such a great welcome. A couple of my old haunts there. I grew up near Buffalo, and I spent the first day at Hasty Hills Farm with Jamie Bates and her mom, Becky Bates, and saw a couple of my old friends from when I was a, kid growing up near that area. My second day was at Heberly Stables, where Alicia Heberly and Margie Heberly train. Alicia's been one of my right hands for a few years while we had a business. Well, I had a business, over this last decade. And then my last 2 days were at Stone Lane Stables, where Sarah Barge teaches out of. And, those are all barns that they may send a little group to Florida for a week or two, they show locally in that area, they may go down to Ocala, and spend a couple of months there. But most of the people that I got to teach were either working amateurs like Christina, or they were pony kids that were sort of growing up with parents getting right, at the very beginning of the sport. And I just have to say, I had such a wonderful time. And I know I say that at every clinic, I had such a wonderful time, but I really, truly did, because it was a lot of teaching in a short period of time over a couple of days with kids or amateurs who hadn't, they're not in big show barns, and they're not when I say big show barns, I mean like where showing is maybe your priority number one of your life. And these are kids that, come to the barn maybe 2 to 4 days a week, or amateurs that, like I said, like Christina, have jobs that are trying to fit in how to work and ride, but they want a horse show, or they do horse show, and want to be competitive enough, but they can still, have the time in their lives for their families and their jobs. And it was a really nice place to see a little bit of, history where I grew up, and see a little bit of where people are spending their time that really are just trying to enjoy riding. And so the courses I ended up setting had some challenging, bending lines through the center of the ring, and then some gymnastics on the side. And it was every day had different levels. I was teaching some kids who were just pretty much, cantering around short stirrup courses. And then I was teaching some juniors and amateurs that were, had their 3-6 equitation background in their lives. And I loved how each person was able to get something out of it depending on what level they were riding at. And they were really good. I tried to have a little conversation with everybody before we started as to what they were working on. And it's the same stuff that I teach, whether I'm in Wellington or whether I'm going to Christina's farm and teaching her. We talk about pace, we talk about track, we talk about, releasing and how to give, in the air and let your horse have the best jump that it can. There were some kids who were really, really nervous about going forward and leaving a stride out in a line. And if they only got the fact that they could realize and show themselves that they could gallop down the 6 instead of being pulling to do 7, that was awesome. There were some riders who just managing to finish a course of 8 jumps plus the gymnastics threw in there. And by gymnastics, I mean, a 1 to a 1 to a 1, 2 verticals on the end, 2 walkers in the inside. I'm sure some of those people who had not jumped more than an in and out in their lives were kind of swallowing, before they went and said, okay, I'm going to go. I had one child who was nervous about what she had to do, just one on day 1. And luckily she was in the 2-day weekend clinic and she had some tears in her eyes. And, she was getting frustrated that her pony wasn't listening to her. And then when she started crying, I pulled her up and I said, what's wrong? And she said, I'm mad that she's not listening. I said, okay, well, does your pony listen to you every day? She said, no. I said, okay, then what are you really upset about? She goes, I'm scared of jumping those boxes. And I said, okay, well, we just talked through what's the worst that's going to happen. Oh, I might fall off. Okay. Have you fallen off before? Yes. Are you okay? Yes. And we're going to try to avoid that, but let's see if we can, tell our ponies what to do with maybe perceived confidence, even if it's not really there, kind of pretend that we know what we're doing before we do it. And then by the second day, she was just cantering over them and had the biggest smile on her face that she was doing it. So if anything you get out of a clinic, and this is for any, riders or listeners or lessons too, is confidence, that's makes my job easy and that's makes my day. So one really, really great question I got at the end of the second day was from an amateur rider who her trainer had brought her in for the clinic, and she was riding a 1.10 jumper who was a really big, long, gangly horse, and she had to work a lot on pace and how to manage a big stride without getting too fast. And what would happen was she would end up either pulling to too deep of a distance and adding, or overcompensating and galloping and then halfway leaving out of stride. Very common problem, right? Everybody has to work on finding that middle ground. And her trainer was so nice and came up to me afterwards with the rider and said, thank you for working through. These are all the things we work on at home, but you're, giving another perspective of it, which is sort of the point of a clinic, gaining perspective. And she says, how do I translate what we do at home or in a clinic to what I think about in the ring? And I think that's a common issue for any rider, as to how do you take what you learned at home, and maybe you're nailing the lesson after, the first 30 minutes. Maybe it's taken you the whole 2 days of the clinic to really feel confident about what we've worked through. You have to think of the horse show as a lesson. And that's what I told her, is you have to approach the course, whether it's a schooling hunter round or, the adult jumper classic at the, on Sunday. You have to break down the course into, okay, how have I seen this version before? I've seen this line, maybe not exactly as it's set, but it's a bending 7 to a 1. Well, I just worked at home on an in and out, after a very forward line. How did I ride that? And break each element up, not jump, but connected or related line up into, how did I do this? How have I seen this in a lesson or a clinic? And it's hard to think that way when you get into the ring. You got nerves, you got your horse's nerves, you got pressure, you're trying to win potentially. But the only way you get better as a show rider is creating the same sense of execution in the ring as you have at home. You're under very different circumstances. That's understandable. But thinking about it that way before you go in, I used to tell my, adult amateur hunter riders, this is just a lesson, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a lesson. You're probably going to make a mistake in the ring. You're probably going to have a challenge that you have to deal with, and where you're going to come out and we're going to talk about it. And that's the lesson for the next horse show. So as far as taking what anybody learns from a clinic or a lesson into the show ring, you can lesson all day long, but the next step is working on approaching the horse show as a lesson. So I think that is probably good advice for anybody in life too, right? We can rehearse, some things at home or in our brains as to how we want to, approach a challenge. And when you get to that point, you just got to, think about it like, okay, what have I already practiced and how can I apply that to this situation? So anyways, I had a wonderful time. I thank everybody who supported that clinic or that whole week of clinics. And I would love to go back. And I also got to visit a couple of my parents' old haunts. They grew up in Rochester. So my dad pointed me to, a cool bar that my parents they dated in high school, a cool bar that they would go when the drinking age was 18,
I
after
was
school.
for the little asterisk there.
Yeah. And then like the ice cream shop where they went as well. So it was really fun. It was a great weekend. Really, really great.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a great time. Well, thanks everybody for joining today's episode of the Show Jumping Podcast. And be sure to check out our Facebook group, Overheard on the Show Jumping Podcast. And feel free to submit your questions there. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.